Bueno, hola a todos, espero que estén muy bien. Gracias por conectarse con nosotros. Me llamo Yael Shkolnik, soy la directora ejecutiva del G100. No les voy a contar de nuevo lo que es el G100 porque ya se los conté, pero sí les quiero dar la muy bienvenida al conversatorio de hoy, porque Israel es un modelo único de innovación. Y en esta oportunidad contamos con Ben Yaron, que nos acompaña desde Israel, y él va a compartir con nosotros su visión del modelo enfocado en innovación que opera hoy en día en el país. También está con nosotros Rodrigo Albagli, que es integrante del G100 y socio de Albagli Saliasnik, firma legal con 29 años en el mercado y que se dedica principalmente al mundo de los negocios, gobiernos corporativos y directorio, y él nos estará guiando esta conversación. Ahora los dejo con Ben y Rodrigo. Les pido por favor si pueden mantener las cámaras encendidas y los micrófonos apagados. Las preguntas las vamos a estar recibiendo por el chat. Y la conversación sí será en inglés. Bueno, muy bienvenido, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Yael. Hi, Ben. It's great to introduce you to the G100 and some other members or some other people that has decided to come to this conversation. First of all, I want to say happy birthday and Yom Huledech Sameach. Today is the cumpleaños de Ben, so it's a very special date for him. So thanks again for give us part of your time and share your experience. I think it will be very, very helpful for G100 and in general for the Chilean experience for the challenges that we have for the next period. We have already made the introduction before you enter because of our mistake, not your mistake. So I believe it's better to go directly with the presentation of Ben, and then we'll open a space for conversation. The idea is to be very flexible and very, with an open agenda. It's not really a speech of Ben Yaron. The idea is to share a lot of information. We have a great opportunity to interrupt and to discuss about whatever we think. In any time we can interrupt Ben and make a flexible conversation, a very open conversation. So Ben, please go ahead, and then at the end we can
okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Rodrigo and Yael and Nathalie, everybody, for having me here. Eliel, you haven't said anything, but I thank you as well.
Yom Huledech Sameach, ad 120.
120 is too much.
It's just happy birthday in Hebrew, that's all. Yeah.
So we'll spend the next about an hour together. And as Rodrigo mentioned, I'll be happy to make it as closer as possible to a conversation. I call it the Israeli way. It will definitely not interrupt me if you will ask questions in the middle. The contrary, it will help me walk through the things that will be the most interesting for you. Because otherwise I will just speak for a long time and it will not be fun to anybody. So feel free to ask questions. You can, as far as I'm concerned, you can feel free to open your microphone and ask a question. If you prefer, or if it feels like it makes too much of a mess, then feel free to use chat. I'll try to have my attention also on the chat to see if there's anything specific. Other than that, I'll give really few words about Startup Nation Central and our, in a way, unique position in the Israeli innovation ecosystem. And then we'll, without further ado, go straight into a short overview of the Israeli innovation ecosystem, a bit of its characteristics, and a few interesting data points, both about the ecosystem and about the reasons that brought Israel, in the end of the day, to be a world leader in innovation. So if all of that makes sense, I suggest we'll go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so let me start with sharing my screen. This is gonna be challenging. No, I guess it won't. Let's see. Maybe I should. Okay. Okay, please tell me if you see the presentation at full.
Perfect.
You see it at full, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, and only the presentation. Okay.
Yes, it's only the presentation.
Perfect. Okay, so I work for Startup Nation Central for the past a bit more than four years. Started as an investments analyst, covering the investments and deals landscape. So I conducted both quarterly and annual reports about the Israel innovation ecosystem and its performance. Then 2.5 years ago, shifted to the business development department, and since then my efforts are concerned mainly in connecting foreign entities and foreign players to the Israeli innovation ecosystem. And Startup Nation Central as a whole is very concerned with connecting the Israeli ecosystem to foreign entities and to different countries in order to make an impact to both ecosystem, both the Israeli ecosystem and the foreign ecosystem we engage with. And today, maybe I'll go one step backwards. Startup Nation Central is a non-profit, non-for-revenue organization. So it's a totally private organization. It's an NGO, so no governmental involvement. It's all private and impartial. We're funded only by philanthropy of people that care about Israel and about Israel's position as a world leader in innovation. Using this position, at Startup Nation Central, we have roughly 3 main pillars of activity. So the first one is around mapping and understanding the ecosystem. We run a web-based platform called Finder, in which we cover the entire innovation ecosystem upon all its components. So you can find both startups, investors, accelerators, multinational with R&D presence. So really, it's a one-stop shop to explore innovation. I encourage you all to look at it. It's open to use. It's called Finder. You can just Google Startup Nation Finder, and you can see all the different technologies. Other than that, the 2 other pillars of activity are concerned with the way we face into the local ecosystem and the way we face out to the world. Facing in, we do mainly in the 3 sectors that we've identified as the sectors that have the largest potential to be the leading sectors in Israel for the next few years, which are digital healthcare, industrial IoT, or Industry 4.0, and agriculture and food technologies. Within all these 3 themes, 3 sectors, we conduct a lot of activities in Israel, produce events, etc., to give value to the ecosystem. Now, the last pillar is really to take all this knowledge and connectivity within the Israeli innovation ecosystem and connect it to the world, supporting different corporates, different governments, different municipalities to do innovation, to understand how to do innovation, and to connect it in the most efficient way to the Israeli innovation ecosystem. We do this in various methods. If we talk pre-Corona days, so we produced actual visits to Israel by decision makers from top corporates in the world. And nowadays, with travel restrictions, we produce digital sessions for corporates and for different entities to connect with the Israeli innovation ecosystem. Now let's take a look at how the local ecosystem looks like in Israel. But first, let's take a macro glance of Israel. So as you can see, Israel is a very small country, and this large pin that we all see now on the screen is not used by accident, because if I were not to use this large red pin, you would never see Israel. It's that small. In Israel, there are about 9 million people, of which about 4 million are in the workforce. Out of this workforce, about 8% are in a part of the high-tech sector as a whole. Now, as you can see, this 8% of just a second. This 8% of the population that are engaged with the high-tech sector is responsible for about 50% of industrial export in Israel. So when one talk about Israel's innovation ecosystem, one talk about the growth engine of Israeli economy. Israeli economy is heavily leaned on the high-tech sector, which provided a lot of Israel's revenues, both in taxes and in attraction of foreign entities to come and create activities in Israel. So Israel, when we look at the innovation ecosystem as a whole, you'll see a lot of data points along this presentation that will emphasize how unique Israel is in terms of density of startups and the money that is being infused to the ecosystem, both from Israeli resources and from foreign resources. And the data point that you see now on your screen is relevant to the entire country of Israel. But if we'll take a closer look in different cities, so for example, if you look at Tel Aviv, which is probably the capital of Israeli innovation, you'll see much more startups per a lesser amount of people. So really in Tel Aviv, and especially in the heart of Tel Aviv, by the way, you see startups every corner. On almost every offices building, there are startups in Israel. And the unique thing, I would say, is that you can see startups across the entire range of maturity. So you can see both very early stage startups and both very mature and later stage startups. And we'll get back to that later in the presentation, because Israel is a very interesting use case because it's still in development. So there is a real storyline to the Israeli innovation ecosystem, initiated somewhere in the late 80s and went through different phases up until today. So we'll get back to the different maturity levels of startups that can be found in Israel. Generally speaking, I would say in many ecosystems, and also at the beginning in Israel, innovation started from an internal need. Internal need that drive the incentive bring a solution that will be both effective, feasible, and innovative. And this is how lots of Israeli innovations started from. And it's not by mistake that you see lots of agricultural pictures in here, because obviously the first and foremost need in Israel was agriculture, which is still today one of the main sectors within Israeli economy. Yael is asking, what percentage of startups grow and how many die? Okay, this is a very good question. It is a very good question because the numbers sometimes can mislead. I don't know about specific percentage, and I would think that nobody really knows the exact number in Israel. As we know, some of it is both the weakness and the strength of the ecosystem. The fact that the startup ecosystem, at the end of the day, is a private sector. It's not a public sector. And when we talk about private sector, the numbers and the data is private and not published, so we cannot see reports that been published from the startups and from investors. So we have estimations. The number today in Israel, or the ratio, I would say, is that more startups are still being founded than startups that being closed. Yet few hundreds are being closed every year, and a bit more than that are being created each year. Now it can, I said it can sometimes be a misleading data point, because one can say, well, there are a lot of startups that being closed in Israel, but the thing is that it was always this trend. And the two important things are, first, there are more startups that being created than startups that being closed. The second is that an innovation ecosystem, or maybe moreover a healthy innovation ecosystem, is consisted from few components. Which maybe the main ones are companies and investors, and the need, which is in Israel's case is usually not in Israel but in foreign countries, and it's a very hectic ecosystem. An innovation ecosystem is always a very hectic ecosystem, because the growth of startups is not a natural linear growth. A startup growth is always exponential, because we start with an idea, and in order to make it a product and a viable product to use in large entities, you have to infuse a lot of money to the startup, so it will grow much faster than an organic growth. So creating an environment of only companies that grow exponentially and non-organically always create failures. So lots of companies are being closed, but also a lot of companies are being open. And this is the beauty of a free market in that sense. So the market gives the signals for the startups, whether it's a viable idea, if the execution is viable, or whether it's not. And for many startups that are being closed, we see that the founders start again, a different company in a different way. They may succeed or they may not. But then we are being exposed to the beautiful stories of serial entrepreneurs that succeed one by one. So I hope this gives a clear answer. I will not address all the questions. I hope you'll excuse me. Maybe we can, some of them we can keep for a bit later. What kind of support has the new startups? So I hope I got this question right. Mostly support for new startups come from investments and other entities to support early stage startups. I'll address this question later on in the presentation. We'll see the different models to do innovation here and the different kind of investors and which of them are most relevant to early stage startups and which are more relevant to later stage startups. So this will be addressed later. Eliel, come on, you write stories, not questions. What is, in your opinion, universities, the army, and okay, what is this? Okay, this is a great question. It's a big question, and sometimes I see questions and call them great questions only because they have great answers. So in that case, it's a great question, a great answer. And for this question as well, we'll wait a bit to the later stage of the presentation because there's a path we need to go until the universities and army. I'll just give a hint. Both universities and the academia as a whole, and of course the Israeli army, has a great deal of importance in the Israeli innovation ecosystem. Okay. So there is a Christian. Okay.
No, he's entering. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here we see a ranking by the global competitiveness by the World Economic Forum. It's been published every year. Israel usually ranked among the 4 first countries. I think the most interesting and relevant insight from this slide is not necessarily the ranking itself of Israel, because it ranks different things, and in different countries, and especially the countries that we see in this ranking, each country emphasize different parts of innovation and even define innovation in different ways. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the fact that this or that country is ranked higher is the most important thing. Rather, the most important thing specifically in Israel is the diversity of innovation in Israel. And this is what differentiate, in a way, Israel from many other innovation ecosystems. So we'll see along the presentation also the different model of or usual model of startups that is very different in Israel than in sorry, someone can close the microphone.
So I put 2 10s for
There's an open microphone.
and 7 ones for the 7. Now I need to represent that I'm taking out 13.
Do everybody hear it as well?
We hear, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, we hear. Somebody have the microphone
Okay,
on.
well, I'll move on. Someone please close the microphone. Okay, so we'll see two different diversities within the Israeli innovation ecosystem. So first, it's the diversity of technologies and that gives a very unique strength to Israel. And the other diversity is the diversity of model. Regarding model, we'll get to that right away. before that, I want to discuss diversity of innovation and diversity of technology. If we'll break down this slide that we see now and discuss each topic, whether it's cybersecurity or life sciences or agriculture, also food technologies, industrial IoT, etc. In each of these sectors, there are hundreds of companies. Namely, in cybersecurity, there are about 500 companies. In fintech, there are another 500 companies approximately. In agriculture, there are almost 400. Industry 4.0 is the fastest growing sector in Israel for the last 4 years, with almost 300 startups already. Attract interest from many countries along across the world, mainly from Germany, by the way. So it's very interesting to see and to understand what makes Israel so diversified. Because if we look at the previous slide, then the country that is ranked first is Switzerland. And the unique thing maybe about Switzerland is their expertise in life sciences specifically. There are lots of life sciences in Switzerland, and this is one of the main reasons for them being ranked so high. Now, in Israel, we see the innovation diversified across many sectors. The main reason for that goes back to the strength of Israel, which is based in technology. When big corporates decide to create an activity in different countries, in foreign countries, across the world, they have different incentives. It can be to choose a country where it's cheaper to work. It can be to work in a country or in a city which is a global economic center, etc. So Israel is none of them. It's absolutely not cheap for corporates to work in Israel. It's not India, and it's not Ukraine and countries of these characteristics. Israel and Tel Aviv is not yet a world economic center. It's not London, and it's not New York City or even Paris. The reason corporates decide to work in Israel is the talent. And many of the buzzwords that we hear around, and mainly in the last few years, like big data, machine learning, AI, all these buzzwords are in a way the strength of Israeli innovation. Because all of those, what's common to all of those is that all of those are technologies and not sectors. In many countries, we see AI, for example, being treated like a sector. In Israel, we don't map a sector of AI because you can find more than 1,000 startups in Israel out of about 7,000 startups in total that are dealing with AI. And AI, in the end of the day, is a capability. It's just a capability. It's a technology that companies in different sectors utilize. So you can see AI capabilities being deployed both in cybersecurity and in agriculture, in industrial IoT, and of course in digital healthcare. And I'm sure that in the next few years, we'll see much more AI being used in digital healthcare. Once the FDA will be a bit more flexible and acceptable to technologies, we'll see much more AI being utilized in the health systems. So here we can see just some examples of Israel most famous, I would say, technologies or inventions. By the way, up until recently, I had no idea that cherry tomatoes are Israeli, but apparently they are. Yeah. Let's see if there is any new question. Not up until now. Okay, great. It's not great. You can ask questions. So I was referring before to the different models of Israeli startups, and I would say that one of the most recognizable differences between the Israeli innovation ecosystem and other innovation ecosystems, and you know what? Maybe it's very bold when one look at the Israeli ecosystem and Silicon Valley, for example, is that in Israel, most of the technologies are B2B oriented. It's almost as if we can call Israel a B2B nation, and they're much more B2B than B2C. There are many reasons for that. Probably the most prominent reason that there are not many B2C companies in Israel is that Israel is a very small country. We don't have the reach out to as many customers as other ecosystems. For example, Silicon Valley. Because Silicon Valley are based in a 320 million people country, and they have the reach and understanding of these customers, while Israel is very far from that, and it's also not part of the EU and not very much in Europe. So in Israel, the B2B got much more developed than the B2C, and it's not only that. You can also see the different, the opposite trends between B2B and B2C. There are more and more B2B solutions. There is more money being invested in B2B solutions, and there are less and less B2C companies. We do have and see B2C success stories in Israel. It's not that there is none of them, but in terms of ratio, you see that much more investments go to B2B rather than B2C. Yeah, maybe one example of a B2C success story can be Waze. The navigation, the GPS navigation app that's been acquired by Google, right? Yeah, by Google. Now, I want to take it one step forward. The fact that Israel is a B2B nation, and when we look at the right part of the screen, we see the segmentation of the participation of different types of investors across different years. So starting from 2014 up until 2018. Now, if you'll take a closer look into the numbers, you'll see that the only player, the only investor type that shifted the most is the third one, the corporate venture capital. The corporate venture capital actually doubled their participation in a number of deals, number of investments in Israel between 2014 to 2018, starting from 13% to 26%. And this goes back to the previous slide about B2B. Corporates in Israel have developed several different models to connect with innovation along the years. So if the most common method or model to connect with innovation a few years back was through an R&D center. Today, having an R&D center got very expensive in Israel. Not only that, the different, in Israel, there are different corporates doing innovation. And this means that the range is from the big tech, the tech giants like Google, Facebook, Apple, etc., up until insurance companies, pharma companies, banking, energy companies. All of the traditional companies also do innovation in Israel. So once a traditional company wants to establish an R&D center and hire programmers, they have a direct competition with Google, with Amazon, with Facebook, with Apple, with IBM, with Intel, with all of these types of corporates that nobody wants to compete with for talent, especially not in computer science. And as this, in the end of the day, it's a thing of supply and demand. The supply of talent in Israel is limited to to an exact some number, while the demand is growing along the years. And we see more and more corporates coming to Israel to have a sort of presence here. And again, if the usual suspect was an R&D center, today we see many more models to do innovation, some of which are concerned with acceleration, with challenges, with establishing communities and support communities. And one of the strongest and main methods by corporates is really by investing. So many corporates hold a venture arm in Israel to be in direct contact with companies that they invested in. By the way, for most of, yeah.
Regarding this issue, how you think Chilean corporations can benefit from the new model of R&D
in Israel?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll address that. So just to finish this note before answering Rodrigo's question. So if we look at the largest corporates that do innovation in Israel, most of them deploy more than one method to connect with innovation. A good example can be, let's say, Samsung, that have both an R&D center, obviously, and they also have not one, not two, but 3 different venture arms in Israel, in different locations with different teams and different mandates. And each of them is responsible for a different business unit within Samsung. So different corporates utilize several vehicles to connect with innovation. Now, regarding Rodrigo's question, he was asking, so what are the right models maybe for Chilean corporates in Israel? So it would be unfair for me to state a specific one single method or model that will be relevant, because part of Startup Nation Central's work is, when engaging with the corporate and establishing a dialogue, to understand the current vehicles and current understanding of the corporate and their ways to connect with innovation, and extrapolate these and suggest the most relevant models. But saying that, the most, I would say, non-aggressive ways to initiate an activity in Israel are starting from having a scouter in Israel, start to look around and see what is the magnitude of the relevant solutions for the corporate, and growing into both challenges, acceleration, innovation centers. A good example can be Visa. Visa have a team in Israel of about 6 people, if I'm not mistaken, all business people. They're not technological people. They're not engineers. They're all business people. And as we know, business people are cheaper in Israel than programmers and engineers. No worries, I'm part of the business people. So I feel comfortable saying that. And their job is to connect with the fintech and payment ecosystem in Israel to leverage business with the ecosystem. So and in turn, they give mentorship to startups. They host events. They connect and keep in touch with the entire fintech and payment ecosystem rather than working with specific teams in Israel. And this allowed them to really leverage their knowledge and leverage their access to startups. So they give the startups both, as I said, mentorship, and then they give access to data. They can, for technologies that are of their interest, they can conduct POCs. And this is more of an innovation center kind of way. So discussing models is really a whole. It can hold a whole meeting. Just a year and a half ago, we co-wrote a report that states and explains the different models to do innovation. We wrote it with PwC. It's a very thorough report that really covers the entire range of models to do innovation in Israel, and I'm happy to share it with you after the presentation. And yeah, I might just need a reminder.
I can do it. I have the report, so I can do it for you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see what we have in the questions. Are we good with time?
Yael, we have 15 more minutes. What do we have? 15 more minutes?
15 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Startups. How do you see the importance of direct investments?
What are the main incentives for startups in tax issues, or where in different areas?
Yeah, just a sec. I'm just going through quickly through the questions. So just a sec.
Ben, if you want, we have a team looking through the questions. Why don't you go on and we'll make all the questions at the end.
Perfect. Works.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't look anymore at the questions. Okay. Okay. Okay, so in terms of R&D expenditure, we see that the OECD segmented the different countries in the OECD among the amount, the percentage from the GDP of R&D expenditure. You see that both Israel and Korea are ranked the highest. The interesting thing, the two interesting things maybe here, are that first, this ranking excludes military expenditure. That for any of you who know Israel, know that the R&D expenditure in military is very aggressive. And the other thing, the other interesting thing is that the average of this R&D expenditure among the different countries, but Israel, in most of them, the most of the money that goes to R&D expenditure is public money. The average is approximately 65% public money and 35% private money. And only in Israel, it's the opposite. In Israel, about 65% is private money, while only 35% is public. And when we talk about private investments, we actually talk about VC investments. And in terms of venture capital, and I think it refers also to one of the questions that I briefly went through just now. Israel, in terms of per capita investment, is located first in the world. But I'd like to draw your attention to the absolute numbers, because also in absolute numbers, Israel is the VC investment in Israel is really unique in a way. So in 2018, there were $6 billion that were invested in the innovation ecosystem, and if we look back at about 2015. There were about $4 billion that were invested in the ecosystem. So we see the growth rate from 2014, 2015 up until 2018. And in 2019, it crossed the $6 billion. And 2020, well, we'll see a big COVID-19 next to the letter. So obviously we yet to know what the 2020 brought us because we're only in August, and this leads me to the importance of VC investments in Israel. So the importance of VC investment in Israel go back. It really goes back to the earliest days of the ecosystem in the early 90s. In the end of the day, the engine and the fuel for a healthy innovation ecosystem is money, period. And we'll discuss this later, but the government infused a lot of money in the early days of the emergence of the innovation ecosystem in Israel, and this allowed to many startups and solutions being formed. And up until today, the role of VCs and of venture capital money as a whole is very important in Israel, both in terms of type of investors. So. Of course, the earliest stage investors like angels have a very important role in the ecosystem to support young companies, both with money and their experience, and in later stages, companies with more substantial VC firms. And again, most of the money that is being invested in Israel is foreign. It's not Israeli. So about 80 to 85% of the money that is being invested in Israel innovation is foreign, and about 15 to 20% only is Israeli. So
that is in current times at the early.
At the earliest stages, of course, when the ecosystem was only formed and emerged, of course, a much bigger proportion was Israeli money, and moreover, it was public money by the government, and we'll see through what vehicle. But yeah. So I'll touch this very briefly. This emphasized the investors' confidence in Israel. This is the oldest slide that we have in the presentation. It's a survey that was published by Deloitte in 2015. The unique thing here is that this survey was conducted in the summer of 2014, a year before it was published. And it gives a very simple and straightforward ranking between 1 to 5 to the investors' confidence investing in different countries. So you see Israel is ranked very high. And the reason to keep this slide specifically from this year specifically is that in 2014, when the survey was conducted, there was actually a war in Israel. So even in these problematic days in a already geopolitical unique area like Israel, we see that the high-tech and innovation ecosystem is act as an island of stability. And we see that this trend only increased along the years, again, because this was due to 2014, and we see that the numbers are just increasing along the years. So this is just a brief wrap-up of what we can see in Israel, the numbers of startups, multinational, of course, the public universities that have a great role in Israel. And the academy as a whole have a very important role in Israel's innovation. It was not always the case. And I think it was Eliel who asked about universities' role, so I'll touch this also very briefly. And please give me a signal, give me a sign if we're short in time. So the public universities were not always in Israel very much involved in innovation, but through an influence of American colleges. The first and most famous college in Israel, the IDC, was formed in Herzliya, and it's a private college. And their claim to fame, in the end of the day, is their direct communication and direct contact to the business world, to the commercial world, unlike the more conservative universities, who were obviously much more academic oriented than IDC. And IDC formed a lot of programs. The most famous one is Zell program, which is very famous to actually initiate a startup from within the university with groups or with different groups of students. This program is very prestigious and still exists today. And in a way, this influence and involvement of IDC within the innovation ecosystem brought about the other more conservative and academic universities to also take part. And today we see all the universities are involved with innovation, all invest in connecting with innovation, whether through programs and mentoring. They all have TTO, the tech transfer offices, to mitigate the technologies to the commercial world. So they're all involved. Some of them also have internal venture arms to support technologies from within the university. So definitely universities have a growing part and role in the ecosystem. And we saw some great technologies came from the academia. Like the great success of Mobileye, probably the largest acquisition of an Israeli startup, started in the Hebrew University. Okay. So now, up until now, I hope I convinced you that Israel is unique. Try to give you both the strength and the weaknesses of Israel, its distance from other ecosystem, its dependency on corporates coming to Israel, its small size, and hence positively small ecosystem. again, along with its strength of talent and technologies. Now we'll try to briefly touch the why. What brought Israel to its position? There are a few major points that we'll discuss, but I want you to keep in mind that it's not a science, and there are many different reasons for Israel to become a world leader in innovation. Different people might hold different opinions and different reasonings. So I'll give you the three main ingredients the way we see them. But again, I'll be able to share the ingredients. Unfortunately, not the recipe, because there is actually no recipe. The recipe also probably includes a portion of luck and circumstances, but yet the three main ingredients are important and gives a very good frame to Israel's position today. So the first one is the fact that there is actually there is no such thing as Israeli. Israelis came from all over the world, from Asia, from Arabic countries, from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe, from the US, from many parts of the world, consisting this multi-nationalities country. But the most significant immigration wave that gave the largest boost to the innovation ecosystem occurred in the early 90s. In a period of 10 years, about 1 million people came from the former Soviet Union to Israel. And this immigration wave from the former Soviet Union was of a very, very high quality. Lots of doctors and engineers, and scientists and computer scientists came from the former Soviet Union to Israel, contributing a lot to the economy as a whole, and especially to the innovation ecosystem. And in these early days, Israel consisted of 5 million people. So it's about 20% coming to Israel. So the government needed to come up also with solutions to get this large immigration wave. And in that point, they spotted the opportunity to support the emerging innovation ecosystem. And one of the first and most substantial offerings and programs by the government was the Yozma Group. Yozma Group was initiated, I think, in '93, and they actually offered $100 million to match each dollar that will be invested in Israeli technology by investors. And this was a great incentive for investors to double their investments with no equity involved by the government. So this was this emphasized both the role of the government prioritizing the innovation ecosystem in its early days, and the role of money to the innovation ecosystem. By the way, some of the venture capital firms that founded to take advantage of this program still exist today. So this was just one of the programs initiated by the government. Nowadays, I would just add the government's still prioritizing the innovation ecosystem, and they have and they give a lot of support in terms of money and connections. But on the other hand, in terms of regulations, the government not interrupt and not interfere within the innovation ecosystem in Israel. And this is one of the strengths of the ecosystem in Israel. Because unlike other sectors in Israel that are regulated, some more, some less, but some are heavily regulated, the Innovation Ecosystem acts really as close as possible in Israel to free market. There are no regulations to the innovation ecosystem, and the government only prioritizing and support this ecosystem. So this is an important thing, and I think it's the government doing so in purpose. They know that this flourishing sector. Now, the last pillar, obviously, is the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. We can create a whole dialogue about the IDF. I'll just briefly say that about 50% in the end of the day, about 50% of Israelis serve in the army, although it's an obligation to serve. The screening process starts 2 years before the actual start of the military service. So the IDF have the opportunity to really map and screen the future soldiers and to categorize them according to their physical, mental, and cognitive abilities, so to put them in the most suitable units within the army. And the strength of the IDF is not its size, obviously, because it's much smaller than our enemies' armies. The strength and of the Israeli army is the innovation and technology it utilizes. And obviously, there are the 8200 famous technological unit, and there are a lot of technologies that are being developed within the IDF. The thing is that every soldier, or almost every soldier in the IDF, at least being exposed to technology, use technology, or even develop technologies. So the IDF acts in that sense as a hub for talent and for technologies. Now, the government does not keep an IP for the technologies that are being developed within the army. So one can develop a great technology in the army and can then when leaving the army, can commercialize it and use it in civil life. And this is why we see a strength within fintech and cybersecurity in Israel. It's not by a mistake. So just to frame and both frame and close the entire picture, we see that Israel has a very vibrant ecosystem that entails a large technological talent. This combined with a small market that we can fairly say that in Israel there is no market, it's so small, makes all the technologies aim for foreign market overseas. And this brings us back to Startup Nation Central's position to support this bridge between Israeli technologies to foreign needs and challenges. And with this, I will end.
Thank you, Ben. We're almost on time, but maybe I want to say that this should be a starting point conversation where we can move forward and go deeper with the G100, where we share a lot of challenges, and maybe we can continue doing some activities, maybe not so broad, but maybe we can go more with an executive committee. Maybe we can do something, Yael, after this conversation. And regarding some final questions, maybe you can give us some final tips or ideas. For example, what do you think about the current political environment and issues that are happening? How can affect Israeli startups and funding and the model?
Are you referring to the Emirates or just in
I would like you to say something about the agreement with the Emirates. Yeah.
I want to be careful with my words, but there are already, even before the agreement, a lot of business and interest from both countries, both from Israel in the Emirates and from the Emirates in Israel. The Emirates look for technologies not only in Israel, but they also work in Israel even from before this agreement, just through a lot of intermediates. And I think the opportunity that this new agreement brings about is to cut, if not all, then most of the intermediates, and to be more transparent and in a more direct communication. This will allow to be much more effective, to understand the needs in a better way. And it will also obviously cut costs, which is very important. So if this agreement will go about to happen, I'm sure it brings an amazing opportunity, both for the Emirates and, by the way, for countries with the Gulf area that will follow the Emirates, and also for Israel and Israelis that have the potential to do business with the Emirates are not currently doing.
Yeah.
Rodrigo, may I ask a question?
Sí, dale, go.
Ben, how do you see Chile in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship? What are our main challenges and opportunities to become an innovation hub like Israel?
So I would say two things. One, this is the question that I would like to ask you.
No.
I would be very happy to learn and to understand the Chilean kind of value chain and the type of corporates, the type of challenges that the corporates face. And I say value chain because through corporates' value chain, a lot of insights can be lightened and understood, and then better refine the different technologies that can be relevant for these corporates. The other thing is, the other thing I wanted to say is that many countries, municipalities, and really different entities come up with this question: how do we make our ecosystem like Israel? And this is why when describing the different reasons that brought Israel to its position, I said that I can give you some of the ingredients, but not the recipe. Because there are not only that there are more ingredients to the Israeli use case, there are more reasons that brought Israel to its position. But also there's just the circumstances that not all of them are positive, by the way. Our position in light of our enemies, the fact that the country is relatively young, about 70 years, 74 years, 72 years old, country that was covered with swamps, with a lot of desert, a large portion of Israel is desert. And all these circumstances forced us to come up with solutions. And as you can see, from different angles in different fields. And again, not all of which are positive. Also, obviously, the position of Jewish people from the 1930s and 1940s that came to Israel. So all of these circumstances are part of what we see today in Israel, both in the innovation and in other sectors. So I really don't think that countries should mimic Israel, but rather to take some models that have the potential to work good also for their ecosystems. Maybe one of which can be the different models that are valid and efficient in Israel. And this brings me to my previous question that I returned to you. It really depends on the current state of corporates in Chile, the government involvement, how Chilean corporates do innovation today, and these are the things that I'm really eager to learn.
Ben, our
Rodrigo?
Nico, our president, wants to say something.
Rodrigo, everyone, thank you. Ben, thank you so much. It's been super illuminating. 10 years ago, I was in the government and I went to a governmental trip. I met with a former minister, Shimon Peres, and I'll never forget when he said, sand is the best soil. Anyway, so as Rodrigo was mentioning, the G100, we're an NGO as well. We're a group of 100 entrepreneurs. We expect to maybe be 1,000 by the end of next year, and we would really what are possibilities of collaboration could it be? Are there between the G100 and a group like yours? And if may I add, we also have a phenomenal contingent of, I don't know, 5 or 10 part of the group or part of the Israeli community, Jewish community in Chile. And I think Israel. Yesterday we were talking actually with Guy Rolnick, who you may have heard. He's a journalist in Israel, very influential, and he was mentioning how important it was to have, as a country, have the right benchmarks. And clearly, Israel, I can't think of a better benchmark considering demographic size. And I also agree that Chile, we need to find our own Silicon Valley or our own road towards innovation. But I think if we could establish the right connection with the Israeli innovation ecosystem, and specifically through you guys, I think it could be phenomenal.
So thank you, Nico, for your words, and I totally agree. First of all, I want to say that you were honored to meet Shimon Peres. Is a very, very, very important figure in Israel's history, a very positive figure, and a very smart individual, obviously. I think that reliance is not all, it doesn't have to be bad. And I'm saying that because one of my, and not only mine, but one of the criticisms towards the Israeli government is their involvement and regulations, for example, in the agriculture sector in Israel. And their and the farmers' reasoning for that, for these regulations, is that it's important for Israel to be self-sufficient, and to be dependent on themselves. And it's hardly a ridiculous reasoning, and the reason for that is that Israel is not self-sufficient almost in anything. We're dependent on the US, we're dependent on different countries, even within the agriculture sector, we're dependent because most of the employees within agriculture are foreign, they're not Israelis. So we import a lot of things necessary for the agricultural sector. Also like gas and machinery, it's all imported. So what I'm trying to say is that if the agricultural sector, and I'm referring to the traditional agricultural sector in Israel, was less regulated, the Israeli population would enjoy from reduced prices and better products that were imported from other countries, by the way, like Chile. I would be very happy to enjoy pineapples from South America and not pineapples that have been grown in Israel, which believe me, there are nothing to tell about. So the reason I said I told this short story is that Israel as a high-tech nation with lots of solutions can provide answers to different countries that lack these solutions, and it goes both ways, by the way. The importance of different countries' interest in Israel and different corporates coming to Israel is crucial to Israel innovation, because we don't have in-house the understanding and know-how of foreign big corporates. Only the corporates that come to Israel educate the Israeli innovation ecosystem to aim and navigate their technologies toward great solution and great products. You haven't heard me even once saying that in Israel we have great products. We have great technologies, but not necessarily great products. These great technologies can be transformed to great products by importing the challenges and, in a way, bringing the problems of foreign corporates into Israel. In that sense, Chile can really utilize Israel's innovation ecosystem to share challenges and to work closely with the innovation ecosystem in Israel. This does not imply at all that the innovation ecosystem of Chile is of a lesser importance. The contrary. Once Chile will work more closely with Israeli innovation, it will automatically influence also Chilean innovation to come up with relevant solutions to support the Chilean corporates. So I think there's a lot to learn from both sides, Israel from Chile and Chile from Israel, in terms of, obviously in terms of methodologies and models that work for us. But becoming an innovation nation will come about through a demand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yael?
And happy birthday.
Yes. Yael,
are you going to embarrass me a lot with this happy birthday?
This was trying to fill up a silent moment there.
Yeah.
Yael, you know how we continue. I think we're on time.
Maybe one last question, Rodrigo, we had.
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay. Ben, I was wondering, we are also a nonprofit, a philanthropic organization. My question for you was, why was the Startup Nation Central created? Why was the need of that ONG?
This is a phenomenal question. And the reason, again, is that there is a phenomenal answer. There is really, I haven't seen any organization like Startup Nation Central. And when you look closer into Startup Nation Central, only then you can understand why this only happens here in Israel. Startup Nation Central is a non-profit and non-revenue that been founded by Jewish philanthropy, namely by the Paul Singer Foundation. And as the name of the organization suggests, it was inspired by the book Startup Nation, that was translated to many languages and made a very good PR to Israel's innovation, obviously. And one of its influences was the formation of Startup Nation Central, that again, Paul Singer and Terry Castle founded. Paul Singer is from Elliott Management, one of the biggest hedge funds in New York. Very wealthy individuals. And the reason they formed Startup Nation Central is really to enhance their connection with Israel. They care about Israel, even though they don't live here. Israel is far physically from where they live, but their hearts are in Israel. And they really and truly care about Israel. And seeing and looking at this emergence of the innovation ecosystem, they have decided about 8 years ago to support Israel to keep its position as a world leader in innovation. Because in the end of the day, there are many other ecosystems that are being developed and create great technologies. And Israel, and it's important for Israel to stay at the forefront of technology. And I think this was the main incentive for them to establish the organization. And we see that today, even though they are the main funders and donors of Startup Nation Central, there are many more donors, most of which are Jewish, very wealthy individuals that really care about Israel. And this is their incentive. They want to directly contribute to Israel's economy.
Okay, thank you. Rodrigo?
See, I think we are on time. Yeah. So thank you, Ben. It has been a great conversation, but we should continue. There's a lot of challenges that we can afford together. Again, in Chile, in Latin America, we have a lot of needs that you have already the solutions implemented. So as Nico says, we can continue talking in more private way in how to create a task force to collaborate. There's a lot to do. I am sure I have been studying and researching and working on this for 2 years, and I'm eager to move forward. So if we work together, it will be much more easy. So I will continue sending you my messages and inviting to more activities and more conversations.
I think that one of Chileans' greatest assets is Rodrigo's enthusiasm.
No doubt about it.
So please cherish it and enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Ben.
I wanted to thank you for having me. It was great. It was great speaking with you, and it was a very interesting conversation. And I hope for our next collaborations.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Gracias.
everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, Ben.
Bye bye.